Now that the first part of Bart Starr's bio is out of the way, I want to turn the attention over to Paul Hornung, but first, I have one small correction. In the 1956 NFL Draft, Starr was the 200th player selected and not the 199th, as I previously said. I had recorded the audio and the video days apart, and I did not notice the discrepancy until after I'd already posted part 3. Now, let's move on to Paul Hornung. Born on December 23rd, 1935, in Louisville, Kentucky, Hornung had a rough start to his childhood. Concerns over his father's substance abuse combined with his father losing his life insurance job led to him leaving the family. As Hornung later recounted, he took the car, she kept the furniture, and me. To make ends meet, his mother got a job in 1939 with the Works Progress Administration as a clerk and typist, and later she worked in the personnel department at the Louisville Army Medical Depot. Life was rough, and he and his mother moved around to different places, living in less than ideal situations, such as when they lived with a widow whose place only had one bedroom, so Hornung and his mother had to sleep on the living room floor. When Hornung was around 13 or 14, his father came back into their lives, and he, once again, was not sober. He acted like he might hit his wife, which led to Hornung to step in and say if his dad wanted to get to his mother, he would have to get through him. Luckily, this worked, and his father backed down, and this was the only confrontation he had to have with him. Hornung said his father never came to any of his games, which is fine with his mother, as she was always afraid he would get drunk and embarrass them. In high school, despite this tension, he would have dinner with his father once a week. He, unfortunately, would never be able to get the proper guidance from him. That instead would come from a family friend, Henry Hoffman, whom Hornung called Uncle Henry, despite there being no relation. Uncle Henry would take him out to dinner at least once a week, often at the Blue Boar cafeteria in Louisville. He would also try to see to it that Hornung was able to dress well, gifting him with a sports coat each Christmas. Uncle Henry saw something in Hornung, as he made the prediction Paul would become a millionaire by the time he was 30. His mother was able to save up enough money to send him to school at St. Patrick's Church at the corner of 13th and Market. Due to his size, Hornung was actually able to start playing with the 8th grade team when he was just in the 5th grade, and when he did enter the 8th grade himself, he took over as the starting quarterback. He was led by Coach Father O'Hare. Well, maybe led by is the wrong phrase. According to Hornung, Coach O'Hare knew so little about the game that he let him call all his own plays. And it was around this time that Hornung started to teach himself how to kick by practicing in a playground across from the Marine Hospital, and later, when he was going to Flagey High School, he would continue this practice by kicking balls over the basketball goals in another playground off of Bank Street. He wanted to be a baseball pitcher because of how fast he could throw, but his lack of control prevented him from going far with that. He was friends in high school with Cheryl Sipes, whom he met in the 8th grade prior to his time at Flagey. Hornung said at first he didn't like him, as Sipes complained how tough his football team played, to which Hornung responded by wondering what did he expect from a bunch of Irish Catholic kids from a poor neighborhood. However, they would go on to attend high school together and become friends. Even though both of them would have success with girls, Sipes would tend to get attached, while Hornung would date around with ease, stating in spite of his Catholic background, he, unlike Sipes, really didn't believe in confession. Hornung and Sipes would wind up getting jobs with the Andy Frame ushering service, where they handled tickets for people coming in to watch the horse races. While people were distracted, they would still mint julep glasses and sell them outside. In the fall of 1950, in his sophomore year of high school, Hornung had then the most important game of his young sports career against the Point Manual High. Both the first and second string QBs had lost fumbles, so in desperation, Coach Paulie Miller brought in Hornung, thinking that because of his versatility in running and passing, he could maybe provide a spark for the team. Well, the offense they were running was a split T, which is a scheme centered on needing a mobile quarterback, so this turned out to be a perfect match. Hornung, unlike the other players, didn't turn the ball over, and they won the game, and Hornung won the starting position. Hornung's best performance in high school came against Owensboro Catholic, where he threw 4 touchdown passes, ran for 2, and kicked 7 extra points. After Hornung turned 16 in late 1951, his mother bought him a used black and yellow Chevy. Hornung decided to take it out for a ride with Sipes and 4 girls. However, he hit a car backing out, thus wrecking it, which was extra embarrassing as that was the first day he had it. In 1952, in Horning's senior year, the team went 9-1-1 with the only loss at Oak Ridge. He had kicked a field goal that the officials called as no good. However, Horning would forever think the officials were wrong. This would have given them a 10-0-1 record and made them just one tie shy of a perfect season. And Horning wasn't the only one making themselves known. Sipes himself would go on to score 23 touchdowns in 9 games that year. November 14th, 1952, their year culminated in a state championship with their 39-7 victory over Lexington Lafayette. In preparation for college, Coach Miller hyped up Horning to school recruiters. In his 3 years at Flagey, Paul could run the option play as well as Maryland or Oklahoma were running it at the time. During this period, Horning got to know Bear Bryant, the head coach of Kentucky. Horning reflected, "Looking back, I have to say Bryant is one of the 5 most impressive people I've ever met. He was as handsome as a movie star, and he had that deep, growly voice." Horning said Bryant must have visited him and his mother at their apartment at least 6 times. Often he came with Kentucky Governor Lawrence Weatherby as they would pull up to Horning's place in the governor's official limousine. Bryant was interested in other players for Flagey, however the ones he wanted most were Horning and Sipes. Bryant had visions of Horning replacing Bay Pirelli to be a split-T quarterback, using Horning's versatility to fully exploit the offensive scheme. Bryant also said he'd let Horning try out for the basketball team and he'd give scholarships to every senior in Horning's high school team. Horning, however, saw through this promise as most of his other teammates probably would have ended up getting cut. And what about perks? Well, Bryant couldn't offer any of those directly. However, Paul Kareem, who owned a meat company Horning had worked at, offered to buy him Cadillac if he went to Kentucky. Kentucky wasn't the only college going after Horning, however. He was also pursued by Bud Wilkinson from Oklahoma, Jim Tatum of Maryland, Biggie Munn of Michigan State, and Frank Leahy of Notre Dame. On this last note, this led to Horning and Sipes to visit Notre Dame, where they had a rather weird experience. The two were taken to a room where Coach Leahy was sitting in a big chair, almost like a king. Leahy had the recruits line up and file past him, and then Leahy would say a few words to each person, not unlike a pope giving out blessings. When it was their turn, Leahy said, "You lads would look splendid in green." And that was it. No overselling in Leahy's part. No hyping up the school or trying to appeal to their egos. He just looked at them and said the team's colors wouldn't look bad on them. That was it. Afterward, Horning remarked to Sipes how strange that was. Leahy offered both of them scholarships without even seeing either of them play, and Horning thought this was due to Leahy trusting the opinion of their high school coach. In the spring of 1953, a Notre Dame recruiter took Horning and Sipes to South Bend, Indiana to see Leahy once more. Horning remarked on how cold the weather was, and since it was during spring break, the students were all gone, making the location seem desolate. Horning and Sipes had decided against Notre Dame, but then they saw Leahy again, who once more addressed them. "Lads, Our Lady needs you here. Lads like you belong in a Catholic college. You belong to Notre Dame. You should matriculate at the finest university in the world. If you're going to play professional football, there's a back door and there's a front door. This is the front door. You'll be nationally recognized." Leahy then turned his attention to Horning. "Paul, not only will you get a good college education here, but I think it can make you the greatest football player in the country." Sipes said, "Where do we sign?" Leahy replied, "We don't sign. We shake hands." And so they did. There's something interesting about Leahy's approach. In modern times, if someone decided they wanted Paul Horning, but they didn't want to gush over him, then they might use reverse psychology and act like they didn't really need him, or even particularly want him. Leahy, however, was being honest, and even in their first meeting, he said he was interested in them, but he kept it to one very short sentence, and then he left and moved on. And that was it. And there's something to be said about that type of zero-pressure honesty that people respond to. It was difficult for Horning to say no to Bryant, but he ultimately went to Notre Dame because of his mother, who was Catholic herself and loved the idea of him going there. As mentioned previously, Horning's first impression of the campus and the area wasn't very good. Once more, he didn't like the cold weather, and he wasn't even prepared for it. In fact, when he first got there, he didn't even own a top coat. Sipes and Horning would wind up drafting a letter to the University of Miami in Florida stating they wanted to transfer, but they never sent it, and looking back, Horning was glad despite the issues he had there. For example, back then, Notre Dame wasn't co-ed, so you'd have to either use a bus to see a girl from out of town or date someone in town who had a car. So that's what he did. He did both. He mentioned dating some Chicago showgirls. Notice I didn't say showgirl, but showgirls. It was more than one. As an example, here's a photo of him with Pat Lee, who was named Miss Photo Flash. When it came time to pick his jersey number, Horning wasn't allowed to go with his old high school number of 20 because quarterbacks had to go with lowered numbers, so Horning selected number 5 in honor of Joe DiMaggio. In his freshman year, Leahy brought in Horning to work out with the varsity team due to his kicking abilities. Every freshman was assigned an upperclassman to serve as a type of big brother to them, and Horning got halfback Johnny Latner, who would go on to win the Heisman Trophy later that year. Horning's first big break in college came in 1954, where his mother traveled up to Indiana to see the Old Timers game, where the freshmen played on the varsity against graduating seniors and players from the past. Horning at first stayed on the bench in the first quarter and waited for what seemed like an eternity. When he finally got in, though, he threw 3 touchdown passes, and the varsity ended up winning 40-26. Tommy Fitzgerald, the Courier-Journal, then dubbed Horning the Golden Boy. Unfortunately, despite Horning liking Coach Leahy, he wouldn't be able to play for him in his sophomore year, as the university allegedly forced a retirement on him because, according to Horning, they felt he got too big for the university. They cut the amount of scholarships Leahy was able to give out down to 24 a year, which wasn't enough to compete against top schools in the nation. So Leahy retired for health reasons. If this is accurate, then it's interesting to think what other forced retirements in this era from college or the NFL flew under the radar. In modern times, if a college or front office unofficially fires someone, it's getting out there. Modern social media has made complete secrecy almost completely impossible. So, in 1954, in Leahy's place came new head coach Terry Brennan, who had been coaching the freshmen. In those days, players had to play both ways, so Horning learned how to be a defensive back. At 6'2" and 195 pounds, he was big for this, however he was able to make it work because of his speed. Notre Dame opened the season against Texas, with Horning doing the opening kickoff to start the game. He was nervous before the kick, and quarterback Ralph Guglielmi didn't help things when he told Horning, "Your first game, 59,000 people looking on. Suppose you go charging up to kick and miss the ball altogether." Perhaps Guglielmi was just messing with Horning because he thought it would be funny, but whatever the reason, Horning didn't miss, and Notre Dame won 21-0. The next game, they would lose to Purdue 27-14. However, things would look up as they beat Pittsburgh in the following match 33-0, with both Horning and Sipes scoring their first college touchdowns, with Sipes getting one on a 24-yard pass and Horning scoring an 11-yard run. A few weeks later, however, Sipes, who had won the starting job at halfback, injured his hip, and he was never the same after that. Horning wrote that as Sipes watched him, Sipes had to have been thinking that could have been him achieving all the fame, and he very well could have. Coach Brennan had been grooming Horning to be the replacement quarterback for Guglielmi, and his best game in 1954 came against North Carolina, where he came into play in the second half and completed 5 passes and ran for 72 yards and intercepted 1 pass where he ran for 70 yards before being tackled at the 1-yard line. George Dixon, the quarterback's coach, was upset over someone being able to run him down, so he made Horning do extra running drills in practice, and it never happened again. Notre Dame would finish the season at 9-1, ranked at number 4 in the country. Even though he would lose in the next Old Timers game, his former coach Leahy said, "Paul Horning will be the greatest quarterback Notre Dame ever had. He runs like a mower going through grass. Tacklers just bounce off of him. His passing is tops, and his kicking is too." That summer of 1955, Horning expanded the social network. Quarterback Guglielmi introduced him to Julius Tucker, who was an executive for a trucking company who would let Horning use his green Studebaker. And Julius himself made introductions to Abe Samuels, a millionaire bachelor, and Manny Scar, a nightclub owner who was supposedly connected to the mob. And from there, Hornung would visit Chicago clubs like the Pump Room and Chez Perret, and he also got to meet celebrities such as Tony Bennett, Phil Silvers, Sammy Davis Jr., and Dean Martin. 1955 would be a great season for Hornung, as he would have a combined 1,215 yards passing and rushing, and on defense, he would lead the team with 4 interceptions. Notre Dame would finish the season ranked at number 9 in the country with an 8-2 record. Despite Notre Dame tanking in 1956 with a 2-8 record, Hornung would rack up the yards again with 917 passing and 420 rushing, although he would throw just 3 touchdowns compared to 13 interceptions, which even in that time period was considered a bad ratio. Despite this, Hornung would win the Heisman Trophy, and this is where the controversy is. It would be one thing if Hornung was just a runner, but he was the quarterback, the captain of the football team, and winning just 2 games all season, combined with 10 more interceptions than touchdown passes, makes it puzzling as to why he was even considered for the Heisman, especially since Jim Brown, perhaps the greatest running back ever, had 986 yards rushing and 13 touchdowns, and Syracuse's team finished with a 7-2 record. Hornung himself wrote that Brown didn't get it because at that time, black football players were still a new thing to the public consciousness, and certainly when you consider that Brown came 5th in total voting that year, it's hard to come up with a rationale for that, which doesn't come down to prejudice. The conventional wisdom is Hornung won it because of Notre Dame's prestige at the time. However, one has to wonder if there was something unethical going on behind the scenes with the voters. To put it into the proper historical perspective, there were no other quarterbacks who would win the Heisman in the 1950s, so we cannot do a direct comparison with other QBs from that decade. We could compare them to passers from the 1960s, but as the passing game continued to open up, the stats of quarterbacks in general also improved, and I don't want to have a situation when someone says, you can't compare him to quarterbacks who came after him. It was a different era. So instead, let's only look at quarterbacks who won the Heisman who came before Hornung. In other words, let's examine the ones who, in theory, should have stats that would be even worse than his. So going back in time, the last QB to win it before him was Johnny Lujack, also of Notre Dame. Then you have Les Harvath in 1944, who was really a combination of a running back and quarterback. Then in 1943, you have Angelo Bertelli, who once again came from Notre Dame. These are the only quarterbacks who won the Heisman in the 15 seasons before Hornung, and once again, because they came in an era before him, one would expect their stats to be a little worse. Instead, a very different story is told. Both of the full-time quarterbacks on this list, Johnny Lujack and Angelo Bertelli, had more touchdown passes than interceptions, and everyone on this list had a combined 1 loss, where Hornung led his team to 8 losses. In fairness, Hornung's passing yardage is impressive for the time period, but again, the Heisman is supposed to be about the best player in the country. And when you look at what Hornung had done just the year prior, in 1955, it makes it even more puzzling, as in that year, he had 743 yards passing with 9 touchdown passes and 10 interceptions. If you were going to give the trophy to him, that would have been the year. However, he would instead finish 5th in the country for that season, so it seems a bit bizarre to say 9 touchdowns and 10 interceptions and 743 yards. He's only at number 5. And then turn around and say 3 touchdown passes and 13 interceptions, he's the best in America. And once again, in 1956, he went up against Jim Brown. Perhaps it was a case of voters thinking he was handsome and more marketable given that he was also from Notre Dame, so they forced this vote through as he was the more Hollywood choice. Hornung himself said that it was the result of Notre Dame's PR man, Charlie Callahan, being the best promoter in the country at that time, and how former Notre Dame alumni were all over the U.S. In the end, I'm not going to say it was definitely this way or it was definitely that way. I don't know, but people will have to be forgiven if they have questions. So Hornung wins the Heisman, and this takes us to the 1957 NFL Draft, where he's selected by the Green Bay Packers as the number 1 pick. He was a solid role player for those first 2 seasons. However, he didn't make the Pro Bowl in either one, and it wouldn't be until 1959 that his career would pick up with Lombardi, who would have Horning's average attempts per game more than double, as he would be the centerpiece. Before training camp, Horning said Lombardi did 2 things that convinced him he knew what he was doing. First, he sent assistant coach Red Cochran to spend a month at Jim Taylor's home in Baton Rouge, so by the time Taylor got to training camp, he knew the offense. Second, he traded for veteran players that knew how to win, like Bill Quinlan and Emlyn Tennell, who served as a type of father figure to other black players. But Horning writes Tennell didn't see black or white ball players, he just saw ball players. On the subject of Horning, Lombardi had this to say: "The more I saw of Horning in those movies, the more I figured he was the man. He didn't have Gifford's moves, but he was bigger and could run harder. Actually, he had better running ability than I thought, and I knew he could throw." Lombardi never said anything about Horning's reputation as a playboy directly. Instead, all he said was, "I'm going to be all over your ass because you need it and you can handle it." Lombardi also appealed to Horning's desire to be with a winning football team again. Horning, by 1959, had already experienced the nightlife in LA, New York, Miami, plus the movies could wait. Lombardi represented a chance to be a winner again, and it was time to get to work. That's all for now. When we continue, we'll cover the early years of Ray Nitschke and Jerry Kramer. See you next time.